A prosperous man purchases a child as a gift. The exchange is lawful, recorded in ink, signed, witnessed. Yet when the girl is delivered to the plantation house, something about her face makes the household servants fall abruptly silent. Something in the set of her eyes, the line of her mouth. The baron's wife collapses the moment she sees her. His daughter screams, because the barefoot, trembling child standing in the entrance hall looks exactly the way the baron himself looked as a boy. The resemblance is so exact it cannot be dismissed as chance. The family Bible hides truths scribbled into its margins. The account books hold names that were never meant to be uncovered. And in a locked chamber on the 3rd floor, there are letters that explain everything. Before we go on with the story of the Harrow family and the child who would unravel them, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have activated the notification bell so you don't miss the dark stories we uncover each week. And tell us in the comments which state you're watching from. We love knowing where our listeners are tuning in from. The purchase took place on March 14th, 1857, in the commercial quarter of Charleston, South Carolina. That morning had begun with fog rolling in from the harbor, heavy and gray, carrying the smell of salt and fish and the distant clanging of ship bells. Baron Wilhelm Harrow, a title he had bought during a trip to Bavaria 15 years earlier, along with a dubious coat of arms and an invented lineage, stepped into the auction house on Meeting Street with a very specific aim. His daughter, Constance, would turn 16 in 2 weeks, and he had promised her something extraordinary. The Baron was 53 years old. Though he appeared older, years of rich meals and costly wine had thickened his waist and reddened his face. His hair, once dark and full, had thinned to pale gray wisps that he carefully combed across his scalp each morning. But his eyes remained sharp, the eyes of a man who had built his fortune through calculation and ruthlessness. That fortune came from rice plantations along the Ashley River, 3,000 acres worked by 200 enslaved people, along with shrewd investments in railroad expansion, textile mills, and Charleston real estate. He had married late at 40 to Margaret Whitfield, the daughter of a Virginia tobacco dynasty. It was a calculated union, joining his new money to her old name. Margaret was 38 now, still beautiful in a cold, brittle way. With pale skin she guarded obsessively from the sun and hands that trembled faintly when she thought no one was watching. Their only child, Constance, had been born a year after the wedding, after Margaret had endured 2 miscarriages that left her unable to have more children. Constance had been raised with every advantage wealth could buy. Tutors from Boston instructed her in literature, history, and French. A music master from Vienna gave her piano lessons 3 times a week. Her dresses came from Paris, her jewelry from London, her books from New York. She had never set foot in the slave quarters, never seen the rice fields where the family fortune was made, never touched anything rougher than silk or eaten food prepared by her own hands. She was beautiful in the manner of a porcelain doll, pale, flawless, fragile. Her hair was the color of honey, her eyes a clear, icy blue. She had inherited her mother's delicate features and her father's iron will, a combination that made her both charming and dangerous. What she wanted, she received. And what she wanted for her 16th birthday was a girl her own age to serve as her personal attendant, not one of the field hands. She told her father, wrinkling her nose in disgust, "They're too dark, too coarse. I want someone pretty, someone who can read and write, someone who knows how to dress hair and speak properly, like a companion. But one who has to do what I say." The Baron understood immediately. His daughter wanted a slave who could pass for a friend in public, yet remain property in private. It was a common arrangement among wealthy families, a way to display both affluence and supposed benevolence. Look how well we treat our servants. Look how educated and refined they are. Look how much they adore us. The auction house was crowded that morning. Planters from the surrounding counties had come to replenish their labor forces after a particularly brutal winter. An outbreak of pneumonia had swept through the slave quarters of several plantations, killing dozens. Others had been sold to settle debts or divided among heirs after recent deaths. The auction house did steady business in human lives, and Thaddeus Crane, the auctioneer, had grown wealthy on his 10% commission. Crane was a small man with an enormous voice, dressed in a black suit that pulled too tightly across his shoulders. He had the smooth manner of a practiced salesman, able to describe even the most wretched person in glowing terms. Strong back, good teeth, no history of running. The words flowed from him like verse, transforming people into livestock, souls into inventory. The Baron had given Crane very specific requirements the week before. The girl needed to be young, between 14 and 16. She had to be light-skinned enough to work inside the house without attracting comment from visiting families. She needed to be literate, or at least quick to learn, because Constance wanted someone to read to her, handle her correspondence, and manage her wardrobe. And she had to be pretty, because Constance could not stand to look at anything ugly. I understand completely. Crane had said, jotting notes into his ledger. Girls like that are rare, you know? Educated, attractive, light-skinned. They fetch premium prices. Price is not an issue, the Baron had replied. Quality is. Now, standing inside the auction house with tobacco smoke stinging his eyes and the stench of unwashed bodies hanging thick in the air, the Baron was beginning to regret his confidence. 17 girls had been presented so far, and none met his standards. Too dark, too old, too sullen, too scarred. One had been pretty enough, but when Crane ordered her to read from a Bible, she stumbled over the simplest words, clearly illiterate despite the auctioneer's assurances. The Baron was on the verge of leaving, irritated by the wasted morning, when Crane hurried toward him, his face flushed with excitement. Baron Harrove, one moment, please. I have one more girl. Just arrived late last night. I believe she may be precisely what you're looking for. I've already seen 17 girls. Crane. What makes this one different? She came from an estate sale in Georgia. The previous owner was a schoolteacher's widow who died recently. The girl was raised in the house, educated alongside the woman's own children. She can read, write, and cipher. 14 years old, light complexion, good health. The estate needed to liquidate quickly to settle debts, so the price is actually quite reasonable. Despite his irritation, the Baron's interest was stirred. Bring her out. Crane disappeared into the back room and returned moments later with the girl. The Baron's first impression was that she was too thin. Her dress, a faded calico gown mended repeatedly with mismatched thread, hung loosely on her frame, suggesting recent weight loss. Her feet were bare, the soles hardened and cracked from walking on rough ground. Her hair, a thick mass of dark curls catching the light in shades of brown and bronze, had been tied back with a simple piece of string. Her hands were clasped before her, and her eyes remained fixed on the floor, the posture of someone who had learned how to make herself invisible. But her face made him hesitate. She had large, dark eyes set wide beneath straight brows, a nose neither too large nor too small, perfectly balanced. Her mouth was perhaps too full for classical standard of beauty, yet striking all the same, with a generous lower lip that suggested both stubbornness and quiet strength. Her skin was the color of honey in sunlight, pale enough to pass in certain circles, ambiguous enough to provoke questions in others. There was something aristocratic in her bone structure, something that hinted at breeding despite her circumstances. "What's your name?" the Baron asked. "Eliza, sir." Her voice was soft but clear, educated. There was no trace of the thick Gullah accent common among coastal slaves, no rough cadence of the field hands. She spoke like a lady's maid, like someone trained to serve in refined households. "Look at me." She lifted her eyes slowly, reluctantly. They were remarkable, dark, intelligent, framed by long lashes that cast faint shadows across her cheeks. There was weariness there, and something else as well, a kind of resigned dignity, as though she understood exactly what was happening and had already calculated her chances of survival. The Baron felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest, something he couldn't quite name. Recognition was impossible. He had never seen this girl before, and yet there was something about her features that tugged faintly at the edges of memory. Can you read? Yes, sir. And write in cipher. Mrs. Brennan taught me. Mrs. Brennan was your previous owner? Yes, sir. She was a schoolteacher before she married. She taught her own children at home, and she let me learn with them. She said it was a sin to keep anyone in ignorance. Even, she stopped abruptly, realizing she had spoken too freely. Even slaves, the Baron finished. Yes, sir. And this Mrs. Brennan, she died recently? 6 weeks ago, sir. Consumption. Her son inherited the property, but he lives in Savannah and didn't wish to keep the household. He sold everything, the house, the furniture, the land, and she paused, swallowing hard. And us. How many of you were there? 7, sir. I was the last to be sold. The Baron began to circle her slowly, the way he might examine a horse or a piece of furniture. She remained perfectly still, hands clasped, gaze fixed somewhere beyond him. She had clearly learned how to endure this kind of inspection, how to separate her mind from her body, how to survive the humiliation of being judged like livestock. As he moved around her, he noticed small details. Her dress, though worn and patched, was clean and carefully pressed. Her hair, though plainly arranged, was neat. The way she carried herself conveyed a quiet dignity despite everything. This was a girl who had been raised with a measure of care, education, and self-respect, qualities that would make her both more useful and more dangerous. How much? The Baron asked. For this one, $800, Crane replied. She's educated, healthy, with no history of running or disobedience. The estate provided documentation of her good character. It's a fair price, Baron. You won't find better. It was a steep sum for a girl her age. Field hands sold for $400 to $600, and even skilled craftsmen rarely exceeded $1,000. But the Baron did not bargain. He wanted to return home, present his daughter with her gift, and put the ugliness of the slave market behind him. The smell of the place made his stomach churn, and the sounds, the crying children, the pleading mothers, Crane's cold, efficient voice cataloging human beings like merchandise, were beginning to trouble him in ways he did not wish to examine. He paid in cash, counting out $800 in banknotes, while Crane prepared the bill of sale. The document was brief, legally binding, and utterly routine. Received of Wilhelm Harrow the sum of $800 for one Negro girl named Eliza, age 14 years, sound in body and mind, warranted against the vices and maladies prescribed by law. This 14th day of March, 1857, Crane signed with a flourish, affixed his seal, and handed the paper to the Baron. She's yours, sir. I'll have my wife see to her cleaning and provide suitable clothing. She'll be delivered to your residence this evening. Make sure she arrives before dinner, the Baron said. My daughter is eager to meet her. He left the auction house without looking back. Without seeing the way the girl's hands tightened for a brief moment before relaxing again, without noticing the single tear that slid down her cheek before she wiped it away with the back of her hand. The Baron walked the 6 blocks to his home, a 3-story Georgian mansion with a walled garden and a view of the harbor. The house had been built in 1803 by a rice planter who died in a duel, and the Baron had purchased it 15 years earlier, when he first arrived in Charleston with his new fortune and his newly acquired title. He had spent a small fortune renovating it. Wallpaper from France, furniture from England, chandeliers from Italy. It was a showplace, designed to impress anyone who crossed its threshold, and establish his place in Charleston society. Margaret was in the morning room when he arrived, seated near the window with her embroidery frame in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "Did you find something suitable?" she asked. "I did. A girl from Georgia, 14 years old, educated, light-skinned. Exactly what Constance requested." Margaret's expression remained composed, but something flickered behind her eyes. "What's her name?" "Eliza. She'll arrive this evening. Her background is respectable enough. She belonged to a schoolteacher's widow who died recently. The estate sold her to cover debts." Margaret set her embroidery aside and folded her hands neatly in her lap. "Wilhelm, we need to discuss this." Discuss what? This gift for Constance. I'm not sure it's appropriate. The Baron frowned. They had already had this conversation, or so he thought. You agreed to it 2 weeks ago. I know, but I've been thinking about it and I'm concerned. Constance is young, impressionable. Having a slave her own age, someone she might come to see as a friend, it could give her the wrong ideas about the natural order of things. The natural order of things, the Baron repeated. You mean the fact that we own people? Margaret's face hardened. Don't be crude, Wilhelm. You know exactly what I mean. Constance needs to understand her place in society, and that means understanding the difference between herself and those who serve her. If she becomes too familiar with this girl, too attached, it could create problems. Or it could teach her how to manage a household, the Baron countered. She'll be married in a few years, running her own home, supervising her own servants. This is good preparation. Preparation? Margaret said softly. Is that what we're calling it now? The Baron didn't reply. He poured himself a glass of brandy from the decanter on the sideboard and stood by the window, staring out at the garden where the first roses of spring were beginning to bloom. He found himself thinking about the girl, about the way she had looked at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. There had been something in that look that unsettled him, though he couldn't have said why. She'll be fine, he said at last. Constance will be pleased, and the girl will be treated well. What more do you want? Margaret picked up her embroidery again, her needle moving now in sharp, angry stitches. I want you to remember that she's property, Wilhelm. Not a person, not a friend, not a member of this family. Property. And if you forget that, if Constance forgets that, we'll all pay the price. The Baron drained his glass and left the room without answering. He went to study, locked the door, and sat at his desk, staring at the bill of sale. $800 for a human being. $800 for a girl who could read and write and think and feel. $800 for someone's daughter, someone's child, someone's entire world. He had made hundreds of such purchases over the years, thousands if one counted all the enslaved people he had acquired for his plantations. But this one felt different. This one felt personal, though he could not explain why. The girl arrived at the Harrove house at 7 o'clock that evening, just as the sun was sinking toward the harbor. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, and the air had cooled slightly, offering relief from the day's heat. Mrs. Crane had done her work well. Eliza had been bathed, her hair arranged neatly into a bun at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple gray dress with a white collar and cuffs, clean, modest, respectable. She looked like a proper lady's maid. Thomas, the head butler, opened the door. He was a tall, dignified man in his 50s, with graying hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his entire life in service to wealthy households. He had been with the Harroves for 10 years and ran the home with quiet, disciplined efficiency. You must be Eliza, he said evenly. Come in. The family is in the parlor. He led her to the entrance hall, and Eliza caught a brief impression of wealth and elegance. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings in gilt frames, furniture polished to a gleam. It was a world far removed from the modest house she had shared with Mrs. Brennan, and infinitely distant from the slave quarters where she had been born. The parlor occupied the first floor, a large room with high ceilings and tall windows overlooking the garden. Pale blue silk paper covered the walls, and the furniture was upholstered in cream and gold. A fire burned in the marble fireplace despite the warmth of the evening, because Margaret Harrove believed a proper parlor should always have a fire. Constance was seated at the piano when Thomas brought Eliza into the room. She had been playing a Chopin nocturne, one of the melancholy pieces she had been practicing for weeks. Her fingers moved easily over the keys, though her thoughts were elsewhere, on her upcoming birthday, on the gift her father had promised, on the new servant who would belong to her and her alone. When Thomas cleared his throat, she stopped mid-phrase and turned on the piano bench. Her eyes widened the moment she saw Eliza. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, Papa, she's perfect." She stood and crossed the room quickly, her silk skirts whispering as she moved. She circled Eliza just as her father had done that morning, examining her from every angle. Eliza stood motionless, hands clasped in front of her, eyes lowered. "Look how pretty she is," Constance said, reaching out to touch Eliza's hair. "And her skin is so light. She could almost pass for white, couldn't she? If you didn't know, you might think she was just a poor relation or something." "Constance," Margaret said sharply, "don't touch her like that. It isn't proper." "But she's mine," Constance protested. "Papa said she's my birthday present." "She's your servant, not a doll," Margaret replied. "There's a difference." Constance pouted but stepped back. "What's your name?" she asked. "Eliza, Mississippi." "Eliza what?" "Just Eliza, Mississippi." "Well, that won't do. You need a proper name. I'll call you Eliza Gray because of your dress. Do you like that?" "Yes, Mississippi." "Thank you, Mississippi. Can you really read and write?" "Papa said you could." "Yes, Mississippi. Say something in French." Eliza hesitated. Mrs. Brennan had taught her some French, but she was far from fluent. "J'appelle Eliza," she said carefully. "Enchanté de votre connaissance." Constance clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, that's wonderful. We can practice French together, and you can help me with my correspondence and read to me when I'm bored." Then she stopped abruptly, her smile fading. She was looking at Eliza's face, really looking at it for the first time, and something in the girl's features had caught her attention. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, the way the light fell across her cheekbones. "Papa," she said slowly, "doesn't she look like someone we know?" Margaret Harrove, who had been sitting by the fire with her embroidery, looked up sharply, her gaze fixed on Eliza's face, and for a long moment she simply stared. Then, very slowly, she lowered her embroidery hoop. Her hands were trembling. "Wilhelm," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Where did you get her?" The Baron, who had been standing near the window with a glass of brandy, turned toward his wife. "I told you, the auction house on Meeting Street." "Why? Is something wrong?" Margaret didn't answer. She continued staring at Eliza with an expression that was hard to decipher. Shock, certainly, but also recognition and fear. "Look at her face, Wilhelm. Really look at her." He did. And for the first time he saw what his wife had recognized instantly, what Constance had sensed without understanding. The girl's features, the wide-set eyes, the straight nose, the angle of her jaw, the curve of her mouth, were familiar, disturbingly so. He had seen that face before, in old daguerreotypes, in portraits hanging in his study, in the mirror when he himself had been young. It was his face, or rather the face he had worn as a child, before age and excess had thickened his features and roughened his skin. Once noticed, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. It was as if someone had taken his childhood likeness and rendered it in female form, with darker skin and softer lines, but unmistakably of his blood. The room seemed to tilt. He set his glass down carefully, afraid his hand might fail him. "What is your name?" Margaret asked, her voice unsteady. "Your full name?" "Eliza, ma'am." "Just Eliza?" "Yes, ma'am." "What was your mother's name?" Eliza hesitated. She had been trained not to speak unless spoken to, not to offer information, not to invite trouble. But something in Margaret's tone demanded an answer. "My mother's name was Sarah, ma'am." "Sarah Brennan." Margaret made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She stood abruptly, swaying, and Thomas rushed forward to steady her. "I need to lie down," she said. "Wilhelm, I need to speak with you privately. Now." The Baron stood frozen, his thoughts racing toward conclusions he did not want to reach. "Margaret, what—" "Now, Wilhelm." Constance, who had been watching the exchange in growing confusion, stepped forward. "Mama, what's wrong? Why are you upset?" "Nothing, darling," Margaret said quickly. "I just have a headache." "Thomas, take the girl upstairs to the spare room next to Constance's bedroom. We'll sort this out later." Thomas nodded and motioned for Eliza to follow him. As they left the parlor, Eliza glanced back once. Her eyes met the Baron's, and in that brief instant, he saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold. She knew, somehow, impossibly, she knew exactly who he was and what he had done. Her mother must have told her. Perhaps Sarah had described the man who fathered her child, the wealthy young baron who had used her and forgotten her. Perhaps she had shown Eliza a sketch, a newspaper illustration. However the truth had reached her, it was clear from her face that she understood the situation completely, and she was waiting to see what he would do. In the master bedroom, Margaret collapsed into a chair and began to weep. In 15 years of marriage, the Baron had never seen his wife cry. She was a woman trained to maintain composure under all circumstances, and to see her now, her face crumpling, her shoulders shaking, was deeply unsettling. "Margaret, for God's sake, what is wrong? Who is Sarah Brennan? You don't remember her?" Margaret said bitterly through her tears. "Of course you don't. Why would you? She was just another girl you ruined." A cold weight spread through his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Think back, Wilhelm. 28 years ago, you were 25, newly arrived in Charleston. Try to establish yourself. You were invited to a house party at the Brennan estate in Georgia. Do you remember?" He did, faintly. It had been long before his marriage, before his fortune was fully secured. He had been young, ambitious, careless. The Brennan estate had been one of the grandest in Georgia, and an invitation there had marked social acceptance. He remembered drinking, gambling, cultivating connections with powerful planners. "There was a girl there," Margaret continued, her voice steadier now, sharpened by anger, "a house servant, very young, very pretty, light-skinned, the daughter of one of the Brennan slaves. It was rumored quietly that old Mr. Brennan himself was her father. Her name was Sarah." The memory surfaced now, blurred and uncomfortable, like something seen through dirty glass. There had been a girl. He had been drunk most of that weekend, celebrating some long-forgotten success. There had been a late-night encounter, perhaps in the garden, perhaps in an outbuilding. He could not recall the details. It had seemed meaningless at the time, the sort of indulgence young men never imagined would have consequences. "You're saying that girl, Eliza, is the daughter of that Sarah?" "I'm saying she's your daughter, Wilhelm, your daughter by Sarah, which makes her Constance's half-sister. And the girl you just bought as a birthday gift for your legitimate child is your own blood." The Baron sank heavily onto the edge of the bed. The room spun slightly, and nausea rose in his throat, unrelated to the brandy. "You can't know that for certain," he said, though even to his own ears the words sounded hollow. "Look at her face," Margaret replied. "She looks exactly like you did at that age. I've seen the portraits in your study. The resemblance is undeniable, and the timing fits perfectly. If Sarah had become pregnant that summer, the child would be 14 years old now, exactly Eliza's age." The Baron dropped his head into his hands, thinking about the girl, about the way she had looked at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. His daughter's eyes. "But how did you know about Sarah?" he asked at last. Margaret's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Because I have always known about your past, Wilhelm. Before we married, my father had you investigated. He wanted to be certain there were no scandals that might disgrace the family. The investigator uncovered several indiscretions, including your encounter with Sarah Brennan, but Sarah was sold away from the Brennan estate shortly after that summer, and there was no evidence of child. My father decided it was an acceptable risk. He never imagined you would be foolish enough to purchase your own illegitimate daughter at auction." The Baron felt sick. He thought of all the times he had congratulated himself on his business sense, his social success, his careful control of his reputation, and now, with one careless transaction, he had brought his greatest shame into his own home. "Margaret, I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," she replied coldly. "You never bothered to consider consequences. You took what you wanted and moved on, never thinking that your actions might create a human being, who would one day stand in your parlor and look at you with your own eyes. They sat in silence for a long moment. Somewhere else in the house, they could hear Constance's bright, cheerful voice as she spoke to Eliza. The Baron thought of his legitimate daughter and the gift he had just given her. A sister she would never acknowledge, a blood relation she would treat as property. "What do we do?" he asked finally. Margaret's face was hard now. Her tears gone, her composure restored. "We do nothing. We tell no one. Constance must never know. Society must never know. As far as the world is concerned, Eliza is simply a slave girl you bought at auction, nothing more." "But Margaret..." "There is no but, Wilhelm. Think what would happen if the truth came out. The scandal would destroy us. Constance's reputation would be ruined. She would never make a good marriage. Our entire position would collapse. And for what? To acknowledge a child who is legally property, a child with no rights, no standing, no future beyond what we choose to give her. She is your daughter, yes, but she is also a slave. The law is perfectly clear. Her mother was enslaved, therefore she is enslaved, regardless of who her father is. You cannot change that. You cannot legitimize her. You cannot give her your name or your inheritance. All you can do is create a scandal that will destroy your legitimate family." The Baron knew she was right. South Carolina law was explicit, designed to protect white men from the consequences of their actions. Children follow the condition of their mother. If the mother was enslaved, so was the child, no matter who the father might be. It was a system that allowed wealthy men to abuse enslaved women with impunity, secure in the knowledge that any children born of it would add to their property, not their obligations. "So we keep her here as Constance's servant," he said quietly. "What choice do we have? If we sell her, she could end up somewhere far worse. At least here we can see that she is treated well, that she is safe." It was a rationalization, and they both knew it, but it was the only option that preserved their standing and protected Constance's future. "Very well," the Baron said at last. "We will say nothing, but I want your word that she will be treated kindly. No beatings, no cruelty. She is to have sufficient food, clothing, and shelter. And when Constance marries, Eliza is to be freed. That is my condition." Margaret nodded slowly. "Agreed. When Constance leaves this house as a married woman, we will arrange for Eliza's freedom quietly, with papers and a new identity. She can go north and begin a life where no one knows her past. Until then, she remains here, and the truth must never be spoken." They went down to the dining room, where Constance was already seated, talking excitedly about her new servant. Eliza stood behind her chair, silent and motionless, hands folded in front of her. When the Baron entered, she glanced at him briefly, and what he saw in her eyes confirmed his deepest fear. She knew who he was, what he had done, and what he was choosing to do now, and she was watching him, judging him, waiting to see whether he would acknowledge her or pretend she did not exist. He chose cowardice. Dinner was tense and uncomfortable. Constance dominated the conversation, chattering about her birthday celebration, her new dresses, her piano recital. Margaret barely touched her food, her face pale and strained. The Baron drank too much wine and spoke too little, while Eliza stood quietly in the corner, a living reminder of secrets that could never be spoken aloud. After dinner, Constance led Eliza upstairs to show her where she would sleep. The room was small, just large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small trunk, but it had a window overlooking the garden, clean sheets, and a warm quilt, a luxury compared to the slave quarters where Eliza had been born. "You'll sleep here," Constance said. "You'll wake me every morning at 7. You'll help me dress, arrange my hair, and bring my breakfast. During the day, you'll handle my correspondence, read to me, walk with me, and assist me whenever I need you. In the evening, you'll help me prepare for bed. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mississippi." "And you'll call me Miss Constance, not just Mississippi. I want you to remember who you belong to." "Yes, Miss Constance." Constance smiled, pleased. "We're going to be wonderful friends, Eliza, I can tell. You're so much prettier and smarter than the other servants. It's almost like having a sister." Eliza's face did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Yes, Miss Constance, almost like a sister." That night, alone in her small room, Eliza lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking of her mother and the last conversation they'd shared before the estate sale. "Remember who you are," Sarah had said, gripping Eliza's hands tightly. "Remember that you are more than what they say you are. Your father was a white man, a wealthy man. That makes you different whether they acknowledged it or not." "Who was he, Mama? You never told me." Sarah had hesitated, her face troubled. "His name was Wilhelm Harrove. He was young then, visiting the Brennan estate for a house party. He was handsome and charming, and I was foolish enough to believe him when he said he cared for me. But after that night he left, and I never saw him again. 3 months later, I realized I was carrying you." "What happened then?" "Mrs. Brennan discovered my condition. She was furious. She said I brought shame on the household, that I attempted a guest and caused scandal. She sold me to a trader who took me to Savannah. I gave birth to you in a slave pen, with no doctor, no help, nothing but a dirty blanket and my own fear. And then Mrs. Brennan, the younger Mrs. Brennan, the school teacher, bought me. She was a kind woman. Eliza, she saw that I was educated, that I could read and write, and she thought I would be useful in her household. She let me keep you, let me raise you, even let me teach you. For 14 years, we had something close to a good life. But now she's gone, and we're back where we started. Will I ever see you again, Mama?" Sarah had pulled her close, holding her tightly. "I don't know, baby. I don't know. But I promise you this. I'll find a way to get you free. Somehow, someday, I'll find a way." Now, lying awake in the darkness of the Harrove mansion, Eliza wondered if her mother had known more than she'd ever said. Had Sarah somehow learned that Wilhelm Harrove was in Charleston, that he was wealthy and powerful, that he had a daughter the same age as Eliza? Had she arranged for Eliza to be sold through that particular auction house, knowing the Baron might see her, might buy her, might bring her into his home? It seemed impossible, and yet so did everything else about her life. She thought about the Baron, about the look in his eyes when recognition finally struck, shock, guilt, fear, but no love, no acknowledgement of her as his child. Only terror, scandal, and consequences. She thought about Constance, her half-sister, who looked at her and saw a possession, a novelty, a servant, never knowing they shared blood as well as law. And she thought about Margaret, the Baron's wife, who had seen the truth instantly and chosen to bury it, deciding that protecting the family's reputation mattered more than recognizing Eliza's humanity. Eliza had learned long ago not to hope for what lay beyond her reach. Hope was a luxury enslaved people could not afford. It was safer to accept your place, do your work, and survive. Dreaming of freedom only made the chains feel heavier. And yet late at night, she sometimes allowed herself to imagine a different life, a life where her father acknowledged her, where her sister embraced her, where she was a person instead of property, where she could walk down the street without lowering her eyes, choose her own clothes, her own work, her own future. It was a dangerous dream, and she knew it, but she could not entirely let it go. The weeks passed slowly, settling into a routine that was both comfortable and suffocating. Eliza rose each morning at 6, washed in cold water from the pitcher on her washstand, and dressed in one of the 3 gray dresses provided for her. At 7, she woke Constance, helped her dress, arranged her hair in elaborate styles that took an hour to complete, and brought her breakfast on a silver tray. During the day, she attended constantly to Constance's needs, reading aloud from romantic novels, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, The Scarlet Letter, while Constance embroidered or pretended to practice the piano. She wrote letters to Constance's friends, carefully copying dictation and adding graceful flourishes that made the correspondence seem refined. She accompanied Constance on walks through the garden, carrying a parasol to shield her mistress's delicate skin from the sun. She helped her change clothes 3 or 4 times a day, depending on social obligations. It was exhausting work, but Eliza never complained. Complaining only made things worse, and compared to the life she might have endured. Work in the fields, being sold to a brothel, or sent to one of the brutal plantations of the Deep South where enslaved people were worked to death within a few years. This was comparatively bearable. Constance treated her with a mix of affection and casual cruelty typical of wealthy young women and their personal servants. One moment chattering like a friend, confiding dreams and fears, the next snapping at her for a minor mistake, pinching her arm when she moved too slowly, or threatening to have her whipped if she failed to perform perfectly. Eliza learned to navigate these moods, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to make herself indispensable. It was a survival skill, and she mastered it. The Baron avoided her whenever possible, finding reasons to leave early and return late, burying himself in ledgers and correspondence to avoid seeing that face so disturbingly like his own, though the house was never quite large enough to escape her. They crossed paths in hallways, on staircases in the garden, and each time she lowered her eyes and stepped aside in perfect submission. Yet he always felt she was watching him, judging him, waiting. Margaret observed everything with cold calculation. Eliza was a problem to be managed, not a person to be acknowledged, and as long as the girl behaved herself and kept a secret, she would be tolerated. Step out of line, threaten the family's reputation, and Margaret would sell her without hesitation. The other servants noticed the newcomer. Thomas treated her with distant politeness, professional enough not to ask questions despite sensing something unusual. Betsy, the stout cook who had served the family for 20 years, was less discreet. "That girl's too light-skinned for her own good," she muttered to Thomas one evening in the kitchen. "And did you see the way the master looks at her?" Mistress looked at her that first night as though she had seen a ghost. "Mark my words, there's something strange about that child." "It isn't our place to speculate," Thomas replied firmly. "The Baron purchased her. Miss Constance favors her, and that is all we need concern ourselves with." Yet the speculation did not stop. It spread in whispers, murmured in corners, and carried into the slave quarters. Because everyone could see the resemblance between Eliza and the Baron, everyone felt the tension clinging to the house, and everyone sensed that the Harrow family was hiding something dangerous. 3 months after Eliza's arrival, on a stifling June evening when the air was heavy with humidity and the scent of jasmine drifted from the garden, the Baron received a letter. It arrived by private courier rather than the usual post, and was written in an unfamiliar hand. The paper was cheap, the ink slightly smeared, as though written by someone in use of fine stationery. Inside was a single page bearing a brief message in a neat, educated script. "I know who she is. I know what you did. If you wish to keep your secret, we must speak. Come alone to the warehouse on Gadsden Street tomorrow night at midnight. Tell no one." There was no signature. At first, the Baron dismissed it as a likely hoax, an attempted extortion based on rumor. But the timing was too exact. The letter had arrived precisely 3 months after Eliza was purchased, as though someone had been watching closely, waiting to see how he would act, how he would treat her, whether he would acknowledge the truth. He considered telling Margaret, but decided against it, knowing she would insist on involving authorities, which would only invite scrutiny. It was better to deal with the matter quietly, to learn what the sender wanted, and resolve it with minimal attention. The following day passed in a haze of nervous strain. He could not concentrate, snapped at servants, and drank more than usual. Margaret noticed, as she always did, but remained silent, having long since learned that her husband's affairs were best left unexamined. That night, he claimed a late business engagement and left the house shortly before midnight. The warehouse on Gadsden Street stood near the docks in the commercial district, a large, decaying structure once used for cotton storage and now largely abandoned, frequented only by smugglers and those seeking privacy. The Baron carried a concealed pistol and $500 in banknotes in case money was the purpose of summons, along with a heavy sense of dread that settled deep in his stomach. The building was dark when he arrived, its windows shattered, its doors sagging on rusted hinges. He pushed inside, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The space was vast and hollow, filled with shadows and the smells of mildew, rotting wood, and something faintly organic and unpleasant. "Hello," he called, his voice echoing off the bare walls. For a long moment there was no response. Then he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from the back of the warehouse. A figure emerged into a shaft of moonlight filtering through a broken window, a woman cloaked in dark fabric, her hood drawn low, moving with calm, deliberate dignity, as though entering a formal room rather than a ruin. "Baron Harrove," she said, her voice educated, touched with a southern accent suggestive of Georgia or the Carolinas. "Thank you for coming." "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want?" She lowered her hood, and the Baron felt the ground shift beneath him. She was perhaps 40, with light brown skin and graying hair pulled tightly back. Her face bore the marks of hardship, yet her posture held unmistakable strength, and her eyes, dark, intelligent, burdened with memory, with the same eyes he saw every day in Eliza's face. "My name is Sarah Brennan," she said. "I am Eliza's mother, and we need to speak about your past." The Baron staggered at the words. "That's impossible. You were reported dead." The auction house said what I paid them to say," Sarah interrupted calmly. "I am very much alive. I have lived in Savannah for 14 years, working as a seamstress. I saved what I could, hoping one day to secure my daughter's freedom, but the cost rose faster than I could manage. Then I learned she had been sold." "How did you know?" "I have contacts in Charleston who keep me informed. When I heard that a girl matching Eliza's description had been purchased by Wilhelm Harrove, I knew it could only be her, and I knew I had to act quickly." His thoughts raced. "You arranged for her to be sold where I would see her?" Sarah shook her head. "No, that was chance, or fate, if you believe in such things. But when I learned where she had gone, I recognized opportunity. You are her father, Baron, whether you acknowledge it or not, and I believe that seeing her might awaken your conscience." "And what would you have me do?" he asked bitterly. "Free her, recognize her, give her the chance to live as more than property." The Baron laughed hollowly, the sound echoing through the warehouse. "You do not understand the danger. Even if I freed her, she would not be safe. Questions would be asked. Investigations would follow. The truth would surface about my family, my position, everything I have built. All would be lost." Sarah stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "The truth matters," she said quietly. "Years ago, I was young and powerless, and you took advantage of that. Eliza is the consequence of that moment, and she deserves more than silence. Old, and you took advantage of me in the garden of my master's house while the other guests were drinking and laughing inside. You left me carrying your child and utterly alone, and when Mrs. Brennan discovered my condition, she sold me to a trader who took me to Savannah. I gave birth to Eliza in a slave pen, without a doctor, without help, with nothing but a dirty blanket and my own terror. I have spent 14 years trying to give her something better, trying to protect her, trying to save enough money to buy her freedom. And now you have purchased her as if she were an object, brought her into your home to serve your legitimate daughter. And you tell me you cannot free her because it might cause a scandal." A wave of shame struck the Baron so forcefully, it felt almost physical. For years he had tried not to think about that night, had convinced himself it had not been as cruel as memory suggested, had buried it beneath layers of success and respectability. But hearing Sarah speak in her own words, hearing the pain and anger she carried, made it impossible to escape the truth. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I know that means very little, but I am truly sorry. I was young, reckless, and blind to the consequences. If I could undo what I did, I would." "You cannot undo it," she replied. "So you must make it right. Free Eliza. Give her the chance at a real life, the future she deserves." "I cannot," he said, his voice breaking. "Not without destroying my family. My wife and daughter would be ruined by the scandal. Constance would never make a proper marriage. Margaret would be cast out of society. Everything I have built would collapse. And what of my daughter? Sarah's voice echoed through the empty space. Does she not deserve a family? Does she not deserve freedom? Or does she matter less because of who she is, because of the circumstances of her birth? They stood facing one another in the darkness, divided by an unbridgeable gulf of race, class, and law. The Baron knew she was right. Eliza deserved freedom, deserved to be acknowledged as his child, deserved a life beyond servitude. But he also knew that granting it openly would cost him everything. I cannot free her now, he said at last, defeated. But I can promise she will be treated well. She will never be sold, never punished, never harmed. She will be fed, clothed, sheltered, educated, and protected. And when my daughter marries, I will arrange for Eliza to be freed quietly with papers and a new identity, so she may go north and begin a life unknown to anyone here. It is the best I can offer. Sarah's face crumpled as tears streamed down her cheeks. It is not enough. She is my child. I want her free now. If you take her, she will be hunted, he said. You would both be caught and punished. Is that kinder than what I am offering? I want her to be free, Sarah whispered. I want her to live as more than someone's property. Then let me do this in the only way I can, he pleaded. Give me time. I will keep her safe, and when the moment is right, I will give her freedom. You have my word. Sarah stared at him for a long time, her body shaking with grief and fury, then slowly shook her head. Your word means very little. Baron, you gave me words once before, and then you abandoned me to face the consequences alone. Why should I trust you now? Because I am her father, he said. Because despite everything, I do not want her to suffer. Sarah pulled her hood back over her face. I have no power to fight you, no money to buy her, no way to take her from you. All I can do is trust that you will keep your promise. But know this, if you fail her, if you break your word, I will make the truth known. I will tell your wife, your daughter, your friends, the newspapers, anyone who will listen. I will destroy the life you have built, just as mine was destroyed. She turned toward the door, then paused and looked back. She knows, she said quietly. Eliza knows who you are. I told her everything before the estate sale. When you see her serving your legitimate daughter, remember that she knows you are choosing your reputation over her freedom. Then she disappeared into the night, leaving the Baron alone in the empty warehouse with his shame and impossible choices. He stood there for a long time, thinking of Eliza, of the way she looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes, his child, his blood, and of the choice he was making to keep her enslaved, to maintain the fiction that she was merely property. He had promised Sarah freedom for Eliza, but he had no idea how or when he could fulfill it. It might take years, and until then he would live with the knowledge that his own daughter served in his house as property rather than family. The irony was unbearable. He had spent his life building a fortress of wealth and respectability, only to find himself imprisoned inside it, forced to choose between his conscience and his reputation. As he always had, he chose his reputation. Glass of brandy and sat alone in the darkness, thinking. The house was silent, everyone asleep, yet he could still feel Eliza's presence, could imagine her lying awake in her small room, thinking of her mother, thinking of freedom, thinking of the father who had purchased her and then refused to acknowledge her. He drank until the bottle was empty, until the weight of guilt dulled enough to endure, then stumbled upstairs to bed, where Margaret slept peacefully, her face calm in the moonlight. She did not stir when he lay beside her, staring at the ceiling and counting the hours until morning. Upstairs, in the narrow room beside Constance's bedroom, Eliza lay awake as well, listening to how settle around her. She had heard the Baron leave late that night, and had watched from her window as he walked toward the commercial district. She did not know where he had gone or what had passed between him and her mother, but she could guess. Sarah had told her she would try to speak to him, would try to secure Eliza's freedom, and though Eliza had begged her not to, knowing how hopeless it was, Sarah had insisted, saying she could not bear the thought of her daughter living in bondage, especially in the house of man who had fathered her. Now, lying in the darkness, Eliza wondered how that meeting had ended, whether her mother had pleaded, whether the Baron had refused, whether he had made promises he never intended to keep, questions she would likely never have answered. Sarah could not risk approaching the house again, could not be seen anywhere near the Harrow family, and so they remained separated, perhaps forever, by law, fear, and the Baron's weakness. Eliza had learned long ago not to hope for things beyond her reach, yet late at night she sometimes imagined a different ending, one where her father acknowledged her, where her mother returned for her, where she walked away from the house and never looked back, a dangerous dream she clung to because it was all she possessed. The months passed slowly, summer fading into autumn, autumn into winter, Charleston cooling but never truly cold, the garden losing its flowers and the trees their leaves, the household settling into routines that felt both safe and suffocating. Constance grew more demanding as the seasons changed, craving constant attention and reassurance, and Eliza provided it patiently, reading for hours, fanning her in the heat, warming her hands when she complained of the cold, brushing her hair until it shone. The Baron watched from a distance, tormented by guilt and indecision, having promised Sarah he would free Eliza when Constance married, yet still unable to see a way to do so without scandal. He consulted lawyers carefully and hypothetically, asking about manumission, only to learn that freeing an enslaved person in South Carolina required petitions, public notices, testimony, and official approval, a process designed to discourage freedom and draw precisely the attention he feared. He considered other options, selling her north to be freed, sending her away with false papers, staging her disappearance. But each carried risks he was unwilling to take, and so he delayed, telling himself he was waiting for the right moment, when in truth he was simply afraid. In September of 1858, 18 months after Eliza's arrival, Constance announced her engagement to Harrison Caldwell, the handsome heir to a prominent Charleston shipping family, and the news was celebrated with a grand party at the Harrow mansion, where Constance glowed with excitement and champagne while her future husband accepted congratulations and made plans for the wealth their union would bring. Preparations for the wedding consumed Margaret entirely, and one morning over breakfast Constance casually announced that Eliza would be part of her dowry, declaring she intended to take her as her personal servant to her new home, a statement that made the Baron look up sharply from his newspaper. He objected gently, suggested alternatives, even offered to provide another servant. But Constance was unmoved, having grown attached to Eliza in a way that made the thought of parting unbearable, and once again the Baron found himself unable to act, watching events close and around him as the consequences of his choices became inescapable. Someone even better trained, even more accomplished. He offered to purchase 2 servants, 3 servants, even an entire household staff to replace her, but Constance refused outright. She did not want someone new. She wanted Eliza. Margaret observed these negotiations with cool detachment. She understood perfectly what her husband was attempting and why, and she had no intention of assisting him. To her, Eliza was a living reminder of Wilhelm's past indiscretion, a constant strain within the household, and the sooner she was gone, the better. If that meant Eliza would spend the rest of her life serving Constance, so be it. Margaret felt no sympathy for the girl and regarded her existence as an unfortunate consequence of her husband's earlier failings, unworthy of special consideration. The Baron slowly realized he was trapped. He had promised Sarah that he would free Eliza when Constance married, but if Eliza became part of his daughter's new household, she would no longer be under his authority. He would be powerless to act without Constance's consent, and Constance would never willingly part with her favorite attendant. He briefly considered revealing the truth to his daughter, hoping the shock might compel her to release Eliza, but he knew better. Constance was too much like her mother, too concerned with reputation and position to let compassion outweigh self-interest, and such a revelation would likely only harden her resentment and make Eliza's life worse. Every possible choice led to ruin. In November, another letter arrived from Sarah, shorter and edged with urgency, reminding him of his promise and warning that if he did not act soon, she would. The message was unmistakable. Her patience was gone. The Baron knew he had to do something, though he still saw no safe path forward. The opportunity came unexpectedly in December, when a yellow fever outbreak swept through Charleston. It was a relatively mild season compared to past epidemics, but it was still deadly enough to cause fear. Wealthy families fled the city, businesses closed, and the streets emptied as people barricaded themselves indoors. The Harrow family prepared to leave for their plantation along the Ashley River, taking most of the servants with them. But 2 days before their departure, Eliza fell ill. It began with a pounding headache that left her barely able to stand, followed by a fierce fever that left her skin hot and clammy, then violent chills that shook her despite layers of blankets. By evening, she was delirious, calling for her mother and speaking in broken fragments. A doctor was summoned, examined her briefly, and stepped back grimly, declaring it yellow fever and insisting she be quarantined at once. Constance was distraught, protesting that she could not leave without her, but the doctor warned that remaining near Eliza could be fatal. Margaret was resolute. They would leave as planned. Eliza would remain behind with a caregiver, and if she recovered, she could rejoin them later. The Baron seized the moment, offering to move Eliza to a small house he owned on the outskirts of the city, away from the main residence, and to hire a nurse to care for her. Margaret agreed without hesitation, already focused on preparations. That very night, the Baron arranged Eliza's transfer to the neglected property, engaged a quiet, discreet nurse named Ruth, and sent word to Sarah with the address and a simple message urging her to act while everyone believed Eliza was dying. 3 nights later, Sarah arrived under cover of darkness, dressed plainly, and slipped inside without being seen. Ruth admitted her and withdrew to keep watch outside. Eliza lay weak and fevered, drifting in and out of awareness. But when she saw her mother, her eyes cleared and she reached out. Sarah knelt beside her, holding her hand and assuring her that she was not dying, that the fever was breaking, and that they would leave together that very night. She told her they would go north, change their names, and begin again, promising that Eliza would be free at last. "You will be free." Eliza wanted to believe her, but she had learned long ago not to trust in happy endings. "What if we're caught?" she whispered. "Then we're caught," Sarah replied softly, "but at least we will have tried. I won't let you live as property anymore. You deserve more than that." Sarah admitted that the Baron himself had made this possible, whether from guilt, fear, or the last remnant of conscience, and that he had told her where Eliza was and ensured the nurse would not interfere. It was their only chance, and they had to take it. They left that night, as soon as Eliza was strong enough to walk. Sarah had brought plain, dark clothing suitable for a free servant, along with papers identifying Eliza as Elizabeth Freeman, a free woman of color born in Savannah in 1843. The documents offered only fragile protection, but they were better than nothing. Just after midnight, they slipped into the empty streets, Ruth watching silently before locking the door behind them. By morning, Ruth would say that Eliza had passed during the night and that arrangements had been made quietly, a story no one would question in a city gripped by fever. Sarah and Eliza moved through Charleston's shadows, avoiding the night watch, until they reached the docks, where a ship bound for Baltimore waited to depart. Passage had already been secured, and at dawn the vessel slipped from the harbor. Eliza stood watching the city fade into the distance, thinking of the father who had purchased her and then allowed her to go, unsure whether his actions came from guilt, fear, or something more complicated, but knowing only that she was finally moving toward freedom. 2 days later, the Baron learned of her disappearance when Ruth informed him that Eliza had left with a woman claiming to be her aunt. He understood immediately what had happened. He could have reported them, invoked the law, and forced Eliza's return, but he stopped himself. Doing so would only bring punishment upon her and invite the exposure he feared. Instead, he chose silence. He instructed Ruth to maintain the story of Eliza's death and paid her generously for her discretion, then told his family the sad news. Constance mourned dramatically for weeks, devastated by the loss of her companion. While Margaret accepted the news with quiet relief, the tension Eliza had brought now resolved. The Baron retreated into himself, carrying his guilt alone. He never saw Eliza again and never knew whether she and Sarah reached Philadelphia safely or disappeared along the way. But at night, he told himself that he had given them a chance, however imperfect. Life continued. Constance married in April 1859, radiant yet subtly changed, and began her new life as a Charleston matron. Margaret died a few years later, still guarding her secrets. The Baron remarried, lived to see the world he knew collapsed during the war, and died in 1869, his fortune and certainty gone. His final whispered words were an apology meant for a daughter whose fate he would never know. Long ago, if she ever suspected the truth about the girl's identity, she never spoke of it. Some secrets were simply too dangerous to acknowledge, even in memory. And as for Eliza, history falls silent. There are no records of Sarah and Eliza Brennan arriving in Philadelphia in 1858. No census entries, no city directories, no newspaper mentions. They vanished completely, which was likely intentional. People who escape bondage and wish to remain free often learn to erase their pasts, to take new names, adopt new identities, and become invisible. Yet there is one haunting clue uncovered by a historian studying free black communities in Philadelphia during the 1860s. In the 1870 census, there appears an entry for a dressmaker named Elizabeth Freeman, described as a mulatto woman operating a successful shop on Chestnut Street. The record notes that she arrived in the city before the war and had built a reputation for excellent work and fair prices. She lived with an older woman named Sarah Freeman, listed as her mother. There is no mention of where they came from or how they learned their trade. But the timing fits, and the profession, dressmaking, was precisely the work Sarah Brennan had done in Savannah. The name Elizabeth Freeman could easily have grown from Eliza, with Freeman chosen for its obvious meaning. If Elizabeth Freeman was indeed Eliza Harrove, then she lived to see slavery abolished, lived to see her people freed, and lived to build a life on her own terms. She would have been in her late 20s when the war ended, young enough to begin again, old enough to understand what freedom meant. According to census records, she never married. She lived with her mother until Sarah's death in 1875, then alone, supported herself through her own labor. She died in 1891 at the age of 48 from tuberculosis and was buried in Eden Cemetery beneath a simple stone reading, Elizabeth Freeman, 1843 to 1891, free at last. Whether she ever thought about the Baron, the father who bought her and then let her go, we will never know. Whether she forgave him, hated him, or simply forgot him has been lost to time. What we do know is this: she survived, she escaped, and she built a life beyond slavery, beyond a Harrow mansion, beyond the chains that once bound her. And perhaps that is the only ending that truly matters. The Harrow Mansion on Trad Street still stands today, converted into a museum. Visitors walk through its elegant rooms, admiring the furniture and portraits. One painting in the study shows Baron Wilhelm Harrove in his prime, a handsome man with dark eyes, a straight nose, and a confident smile. If you look closely, and if your imagination allows, you might see a resemblance to a barefoot girl who once stood in that very room, waiting to learn her fate. A girl who carried his blood, who was his daughter in every way that mattered except the only way the law recognized. The guides never mention her. There is no plaque, no explanation, no acknowledgement that she ever existed. Official history records only that a slave girl named Eliza briefly served Constance Harrove before dying of yellow fever in 1858. It is as if she never lived at all. But if you stand in that study long enough, if you let the weight of history press down on you, you might feel her presence. You might imagine her watching, waiting, judging. You might hear the unspoken question that haunts every story of injustice and stolen lives. How could you? And you might wonder, as the Baron did in his final years, whether some debts can ever truly be repaid, whether saying, "I'm sorry" is ever enough, whether giving someone a chance at freedom can absolve the act of enslaving them in the first place. The answer, of course, is no. Some wounds are too deep, some sins too great. The Baron bought his own daughter at auction, kept her enslaved in his home, and allowed her to serve his legitimate child for 18 months before finally permitting her escape. That is not redemption, only a slightly less terrible ending to a terrible story. but it is the ending we have, and perhaps that is all history can offer. Not justice, not forgiveness, not even certainty, but the truth laid bare and the question of what we ourselves would have done in their place. What do you think of this story? Did the Baron do enough to make amends? Do you believe Eliza and Sarah reached freedom, or were they caught and dragged back into bondage? Leave your thoughts in the comments if this dark chapter of American history moved you. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this story with someone who loves historical mysteries. See you in the next one.